Hi everybody, I'm Amanda, and as some of you as our regular blog readers may know, I am the photography studio manager here at Londolozi, and I work with guests every day with all aspects of their photography, from wildlife photography tutorials and the ideal camera setup right through to editing tutorial sessions in our photography studio, where we play around with Lightroom, edit and print out some of their best photos from our guests from their safari. And spending time one-on-one with guests is fantastic, but I've had a lot of requests from additional resources from those guests who wanted to continue with their editing training. And that's how I found myself here, where I wanted to create a series of Lightroom tutorials for anyone who's interested in the basics, right through to some more intricate techniques, whether you have visited us in Londolozi Creative Hub or not. My first tutorial is going to take you through my basic workflow. And notice how I didn't say the basic workflow, because each person is going to have their own style of editing and will work in a different way. This is mine, which should take you through the general adjustments that you can make in Lightroom. And as I go, I will expand on the various other tools and components of the software. So I'm going to jump straight into Lightroom here. And I've chosen a few photos that I took recently out while on drive and in the reserve. And I just wanted to go and take you through how I kind of run each photo, and everything's going to be different. Every photo is going to be different, so this is how I start. And I first of all have a look at composition and click over here on this top section, which is the crop tool. And you can faintly see here that the kind of rule of thirds is very nicely indicated here, which is definitely a good guideline for composition. If you kind of have a look as I zoom in here, right over here, we're on one of these 4 intersection points. You can faintly see them here. You kind of want the most important part, or the most interesting part of the photo, to sit in one of these 4 intersection points, not at the kind of detriment to the rest of the photo where you're cropping in too much and you're chopping off legs and the rest of the body. So I think in the region of is great, and I always use this as a nice guideline. So that's about right there. The next part I'm going to play with is white balance, and you can see over here, you can play with the temperature. You can go really cold, you can go really warm. That looks way too over-processed. I'm just going to lighten this up just a touch and just warm it up and bring a little bit more sunshine to the image. Tint over here, I don't generally play with at all. I think it's quite a dangerous place to be unless you know exactly what you're doing or you want a specific kind of effect from it, so I generally leave tint alone. And then I'll jump into exposure and I'll play around with a little bit of extra light. You can see here too much light is overexposed, and you can underexpose things. Nice thing to know is that in Lightroom you can adjust the lighting conditions quite nicely, especially if you've shot in RAW. So not to worry too much if your photo comes out a little over or underexposed. You can always adjust it at a later stage. But here I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness, and that's to A, make it brighter, and B, to compensate for the other adjustments I generally make when I'm editing. Add a little bit of contrast. Again, too much contrast looks very processed, depending on what you want from your photo. As I said, I like to keep things quite natural. Then I jump here into highlights. Highlights is going to highlight anything that is bright. It's going to make it brighter. And again, my general technique is to drop highlights completely and then also drop shadows way up to the right hand side, and it lifts. You can see here how it's lifted the shadow on that face, and a little bit of shadow kind of around the whisker area as well. And then you bring that definition back when you play with clarity later on. So I'm going to also pump up the whites a little bit. Again, white saturation is going to saturate any pixel that has white in it. Desaturated is going to kind of dull it down again. I do a little bit either side. Black's the same. A nice kind of trick just to see where all the white is sitting is if you hold down Alt on your keyboard and then you press on white and black saturation. You'll see the whole screen goes black. And as you press this white saturation up to the right, anything that's registering on the screen means that that white is being overblown. So you can see in this area and over here. So I'm going to take that back down again. Just a nice trick. Same thing with the black saturation. Press and hold Alt, and as you move to the left, anything that starts to register is oversaturation of black. And you can be quite a lot more aggressive. You can see here I've moved quite a lot more to the left on the black toggle. Again, I don't generally edit like that. I like to edit by eye and by feel. So I just generally do a little bit either way, depending on the photo itself. And then I play with clarity, and clarity is a great tool, which I will get into more detail, I think, in the next set of tutorials. But for now, you can see if you go all the way to the left, it's going to soften out the whole image, and it's going to soften out the contrast between all the light and dark pixels. And then if you go all the way to the right, it's going to really harden things up and make it look quite harsh. And again, it totally depends on what your objective is for your editing. I like to keep it quite natural but bring out as much detail as possible depending on the quality of the image. So I'm going to bring it up just to about there. And you can always go back and play with it if you want. Vibrance and saturation is great. You can bring a lot of kind of fun and color in. Again, we're moving into the over-processed look there, too much for me. And I like to instead just rather play with the hue, saturation, and luminance panel over here. And that's what HSL stands for, hue, saturation, and luminance. And if I click open all of the panels, you'll see that you really have a lot of play when it comes to colors. You can play with the saturation, you can change the different hues, and then again, you can make the colors brighter or duller as you go. And that's definitely a whole tutorial in itself. For now, I like to just jump straight into saturation and not to worry about changing the colors too much. I'll maybe saturate a little bit of extra orange, tiny bit of yellow, and that's pretty much all we've got going color-wise in this. There's a bit of green here in the eye, but I don't want to make that too harsh. So that's all I'll do on the color section. Split toning, again, something that needs its own tutorial, where you color the highlights and the shadows, and then you can play around with the kind of balance of that. It's the same thing as tint for me, a very dangerous area to play in unless you have a specific need for it. So I generally like to just take all of that away and leave it as is. I'll close that up. The detail panel's great. Sharpening is kind of clarity's second cousin. They do very similar things. Sharpening is a much finer way of clearing an image up. And I like to just zoom in on this panel here on the right hand side. And it's important to know that you don't only work in this section here. You are working across the whole image, so it's a global adjustment as opposed to a local adjustment. But this is just nice to zoom in and see how your sharpening is going. Always like to check the eye. Make sure you're not over sharpening like that, where you can really pick up a lot of noise. I'm going to keep it just about there. You want a lot of detail to come out. And again, I look here, but I also keep checking back to the image to make sure that I'm getting the result that I want. And we're looking quite good here, getting some nice detail on the nose. All of these lovely ear hairs are popping out. That's looking great. The rest I'll deal with again, I think another tutorial where we can do quite a lot on the detail, clarity, sharpening side of things. So for now, I'll do a quick bit of sharpening and that's it. And then the last thing I do is add a vignette. And if I go all the way down, you can see it darkens the corners. And what that does is it tricks your eye from focusing on the outside sections of the photo. And it tricks it, or it guides it into the center where you've now positioned your subject quite nicely. If I work here, you can change the midpoint. You can bring it in so it can be quite a harsh sort of vignette. You can change the roundness of it, make it round, oval, square, whatever you like. And then the feather also, you can feather it nicely, which is sometimes a really nice effect. If you go the other way, it creates kind of a TV screen looking vignette, which is not great. So I'm not going to keep it that intense. I'm going to take everything back up, and I'm just going to drop the corners very slightly. I never want this to look like it's been processed through Lightroom, although generally they all are. That's kind of where I want to leave it for now. The last thing I'm going to do, and this again warrants a whole nother tutorial, is just pop into this brush section at the top. And these are all local adjustments at the top. So as I said, on the right hand side here, running down the right is a global adjustment tool, so it's going to adjust the entire image. These top sections are all local adjustments. And you've got spot removal, red and pet eye removal. You've got a graduated filter and a radial filter. And then here's probably my favorite part of Lightroom, and that's the brush tool. And over here under effects, you can see there's a whole lot of stuff that you can brush on. But what I'm going to choose here is just the Iris Enhance. And you have a look here in the panel. It's a mixture of saturation, a little bit of clarity, and a little bit of exposure. And that mixture there is going to make up the Iris Enhance adjustment. I'm going to just zoom into the eye, and I'm going to take my brush tool. You can make it as large or as small as you want, either by bringing up the size here on the brush, or by clicking the left and right bracket tool on your keyboard, or you can actually just scroll up and down on your mouse, and that's what I'm doing now. So you're just going to brush onto there. I'm pressing O on my keyboard, and I'm going to put that indicator on just to show where I'm brushing. I don't want this to overlap too much on anything else. That looks good. I'm going to zoom into the other eye. Just polish this up a little bit. Zoom out again. Take my indicator off, and then over here is the amount section where you can play with the amount. You can dull it down. You can go right up to crazy eyes, which again looks completely over-processed. I just like to have a little bit of extra oomph in the eyes, a little bit of extra sparkle, and that's pretty much all I would do. If you toggle this light bulb or light switch looking toggle here, you can see that's the before and that's the after, and I quite like that effect. I'm going to close that up. And that's generally what I would do. So I'm going to go through probably another couple of photos. I'm going to move over to this elephant eye. Again, I'm going to check my rule of thirds, check my composition. This is looking great. You can see that the most interesting part of the photo is really sitting in this middle third here, nicely positioned in that middle, that central block, somewhere in the region of the 4 intersection points. So I'm not going to crop in at all. I'm going to add a tiny bit of warmth. Just a little bit of sunshine, maybe a little bit of exposure. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. I'm going to see what's happening here with the highlights, not much. And in actual fact, I'm going to drop them again. I'm not too phased about that. Lifting the shadows, you can see we're getting a little more here. So from there up to the right-hand side, I'm lifting the shadow, which I actually quite like as well. I'm going to saturate white and black. I'm not going to do too much because it darkens the whole thing down and makes it quite harsh. So a little bit there. Clarity is really great, especially on elephant photography, where you just bring in that detail right into all of these lovely folds and cracks all over the skin. Color-wise, I think everything's great. I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to oversaturate any of this background color. It draws your eye away from what you want the focus of the photo to be. Split toning again, not going to touch. Detail, I'm going to zoom in somewhere that I can kind of see the cracks and folds. I'm going to bring that up a little more. You can see straight away how this is really making all of these lovely little forehead hairs pop out. The eyelashes are getting nice and sharp. So that's perfect. And again, you can be a bit more aggressive with your sharpening on elephant photography. And then the last thing is just a vignette. So that's pretty good. I'm going to lift the corners a little bit. I don't want so much taken away from that top corner. And that's really it. What I forgot to mention on the first photo is by pressing Y on your keyboard, you can go to a before and after view and see what you have, how far you've come on your edit. Always like to check, just check and see on the first or the original part of the photo, is the thing that really made you want to edit the photo still there, or have you over-processed it? And that's the question I always ask myself. If you've kind of over-edited and lost the integrity of what you loved about it in the first place, then that for me is a sign to go back and adjust, and take some adjustments away, and make sure that you keep the kind of the truth from the photo. So I'm happy with that. I love the warmth and I love the detail. I'm going to pop over to this line, and I think that'll be the last one. You can see nice composition there. Kind of, it doesn't have to be exact. It's a rule, it's a guideline, it's not an absolute rule. So it's sitting nicely there in the middle. There's something interesting happening. It's kind of off center. Not going to touch the crop on there. Definitely want to add a bit of warmth. There's lovely warm tones to this scene. Bring a little bit of light in and some contrast. Again, you can see the highlights are playing quite a big part here. I'm going to drop them down and soften that light out a little bit. Again, bringing up the shadow, you get a lot more detail in the face. White and black saturation up. Clarity with lion photography, too much clarity brings out a lot of the black flecks in their hair. and their coat. So I'm not going to do too much of that. The photo is quite sharp to begin with, so I'm going to take it up to about there. Color-wise, popping down here, maybe a little bit of extra orange and yellow just to bring that coat out some more. And also there's some lovely warm orangey tones happening here in the mouth, which is great. I'm going to focus in on this eye again, just sharpen up a little. That's looking good. And then a vignette. Quite nice to actually do quite a deep vignette here. One of my previous tutorial videos or video tutorials, I did a section on how to knock back the background when you really want to focus on the subject. So the vignette does that quite nicely there. It takes the brightness away from that top corner and that bottom left and right corner, so it really draws your eye in. And then last but not least, I'm going to do an iris enhance. Not sure why the leopard is up there. And again, you can turn your indicator on. Just shows you where you're brushing. Just going to move over here to this other eye. And that's it. Press O again, take the indication off, and just bring that up a little. And that's really all I would do. So you can see nice warm tones, just the same basic flow. Each photo is going to demand something different, and as you practice and get more and more into your editing, you're going to want to do some different effects. But that's pretty much all I would do. Nice basics and nice platform to build on. And as I said, I'm going to explore some more techniques as I go in future tutorials. So please leave your comments or your questions below this post, and let me know if there's anything in particular that you would like to see or learn. I'm going to try and explore all of these panels as best I can and just show you some really great techniques as well as we go.